In the remote mountains of northern Montana, where winter winds carry whispers of forgotten tales and summer wildflowers paint meadows in impossible colors, lived a man who had chosen silence over society. The townspeople of Cedar Ridge, 30 miles down the winding mountain road, spoke of him in hushed tones. They called him the Mountain Man, though none had learned his real name. Some claimed he was 7 feet tall. Others swore he could speak to bears. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that this solitary giant would soon have his entire world turned upside down by a 7-year-old girl with dirt-streaked cheeks and flowers in her pockets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to the peaks like old memories when Marcus Thorne first spotted the small figure stumbling through his forest. He had been checking his rabbit snares along the creek that twisted through his property, moving with the practiced silence of someone who had spent 15 years learning every route, every stone, every hidden path in these mountains. At 42, Marcus had the weathered hands of a man who built everything he owned, and the cautious eyes of someone who had good reason to avoid the world below. The child was maybe 50 yards away, moving in the clumsy, desperate way of someone who had been walking too long. Her clothes were torn, her dark hair tangled with twigs and pine needles, and even from this distance, Marcus could see she was favoring her left ankle. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, and she was alone in wilderness that had claimed the lives of experienced hikers. Marcus froze behind a cluster of Douglas firs, his mind racing. In all his years on the mountain, he had encountered exactly 3 other human beings on his land: 2 lost hunters who he had silently redirected away from his cabin, and a park ranger who had been looking for those same hunters. He had not spoken to another person in over 2 years. The last conversation he'd had with anyone from town was with old Henrik at the hardware store, and that had been purely transactional: nails, rope, winter supplies. The girl stumbled again, catching herself against a birch tree, and Marcus heard her make a small sound of pain. She was wearing sneakers that were clearly meant for city sidewalks, not mountain terrain, and her thin jacket would be useless when the temperature dropped after sunset, which it would dramatically, even in late spring. Marcus had rules. The first and most important rule was stay hidden, stay alone, stay safe. The second rule was the mountain provides everything you need if you listen to it. The third rule was never get involved with people from the outside world, because people brought complications, and complications brought pain. But she was just a child. He watched as she sank down beside the creek, cupping water in her small hands to drink. Smart girl, he thought. At least she knew to stay near water. She pulled something from her pocket, crackers, maybe, or cookies, and ate with the focused intensity of genuine hunger. Then she did something that made Marcus's chest tighten unexpectedly. She pulled a handful of small wildflowers from her other pocket, flowers she had apparently been collecting as she walked, and carefully arranged them on a flat rock beside the stream. Even lost, even scared, even hungry, she was making something beautiful. Marcus had been making his decision before he realized it. He stepped out from behind the trees, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. The girl looked up and immediately scrambled backward, her eyes wide with fear. "Hey," Marcus said softly, his voice rusty from disuse. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him, and Marcus realized what she was seeing. He stood 6'4" in his worn boots, with a thick black beard that reached halfway down his chest, graying at the edges. His hair was long and tied back with a piece of leather cord. His clothes were practical mountain gear: flannel shirt, canvas pants, a wool vest he had knitted himself during the endless winter evenings. He probably looked like something out of a children's fairy tale, and not necessarily the friendly kind. "Are you lost?" he asked, crouching down to make himself less imposing. The girl nodded, but didn't speak. Her eyes were an unusual pale green, like new spring leaves, and they held an intelligence that seemed older than her years. "What's your name?" Marcus tried. "Emma," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Emma Charlotte Foster." "Emma. That's a nice name. I'm Marcus." He paused, realizing he hadn't said his own name out loud in years. "You're pretty far from town, Emma. How did you get up here?" She looked down at her hands. "I was with Uncle Ray. He was supposed to take me camping, but he left me." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Marcus heard the tremor underneath. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. An adult had abandoned a child in the wilderness. How long ago? "Yesterday morning, I think. I tried to find the road, but everything looks the same." She gestured at the endless forest surrounding them. "I thought maybe if I followed the water." "That was smart thinking," Marcus said, and meant it. "The creek does lead down toward the valley eventually, but it's a long way, and there are some dangerous spots." He studied her face, noting the exhaustion, the way she was unconsciously protecting her injured ankle. "When did you last eat?" Emma held up the remains of what looked like a granola bar. "This was my last one." Marcus made his decision. "Emma, I live up here on the mountain. I have food and a warm place to stay, and I can help you get back to town safely. Would you like to come with me?" She studied his face for a long moment, with that unsettling adult assessment in her child's eyes. Then she nodded. Marcus single quotes S. Cabin was a 20-minute walk through terrain he could navigate blindfolded. He carried Emma when her ankle gave out completely, surprised by how light she was, how she smelled like pine sap and the particular sweetness of children. She didn't chatter the way he imagined most kids would. Instead, she looked around with quiet curiosity, asking occasional questions about plants or birds, accepting his brief answers without pushing for more. The cabin sat in a natural clearing, backed up against a rock face that provided shelter from the worst winter storms. Marcus had built it himself, log by log, over the course of 2 summers when he first came to the mountain. It was simple but solid, one large room that served as kitchen, living area, and workspace, with a sleeping loft above and a small root cellar below. Solar panels on the roof powered a few basic electrical needs. A vegetable garden stretched along the south side, already showing neat rows of early spring greens. Emma stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "All by yourself?" "Yes." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "It's really nice." Marcus realized he was pleased by her approval, which was a strange feeling. He hadn't cared what anyone thought of his life or his choices in a very long time. He got Emma settled on the couch with blankets and cushions, then made her a simple meal, scrambled eggs from his chickens, toast from bread he had baked that morning, wild raspberry jam he had put up the previous summer. She ate with the focused attention of genuine hunger, and he found himself making more food, just to watch her face light up. "This is really good," she said, managing to get raspberry jam on her nose. "Did you make the jam too?" "I did. The berries grow wild here in summer." "Can you teach me?" The question caught him off guard. "Teach you what?" "How to make jam and bread. And how to know which plants are safe to eat." She paused, considering. "And how to build things." Marcus stared at her. When was the last time anyone had asked him to teach them anything? When was the last time anyone had looked at his skills as something valuable, rather than evidence of his antisocial tendencies? "We'll see," he said finally. "First we need to get you back to your family." Emma's face closed off slightly. "I don't really have family. Just Uncle Ray, and he ... She shrugged. "He said taking care of me was too much trouble." Marcus felt that cold anger settling in his chest again. "What about your parents?" "They died in a car accident when I was 5. I've been in foster homes since then. Uncle Ray was... He was supposed to be different. He's my mom's brother. But I guess blood doesn't always matter. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this. The child was an orphan, abandoned by the one relative who should have protected her. The system had failed her, and now she was alone except for a mountain hermit who barely remembered how to have conversations with other people. "Well," he said finally, "you're safe now. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep in his bed, he had insisted, despite her protests, and made himself a bedroll by the fire. Marcus sat on his porch and tried to think through the situation logically. He should take her down to town in the morning, contact the authorities, let the system handle her case. That was the responsible thing to do. But something about the way she had arranged those wildflowers by the creek, the way she had asked to learn rather than simply demanding to be entertained, the matter-of-fact way she had accepted being abandoned, it all suggested a resilience and wisdom that broke his heart. Marcus had come to the mountain to escape people, to escape the complications and pain that came with caring about others. He had built a life of perfect solitude, where the only risks were weather and wildlife, where the only betrayals came from equipment failures or his own miscalculations. But now there was a 7-year-old girl sleeping in his bed, and for the first time in 15 years, his cabin felt like it might actually be a home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, Marcus woke to the sound of quiet humming. He sat up on his bedroll, instantly alert, then remembered Emma. He looked toward the kitchen area and saw her standing on a chair at his sink, carefully washing the dishes from the night before. She had somehow managed to dress herself in her torn clothes and finger-comb her hair into something resembling order. "Good morning," she said when she noticed he was awake. "I hope it's okay that I got up. I tried to be quiet." "It's fine, Marcus." Sod, struck again by her politeness, her consideration. "You didn't have to do the dishes. I wanted to help." She stepped down from the chair and turned to face him. "Marcus, are you going to take me back to town today?" The direct question hung in the air between them. Marcus studied her face, looking for what she wanted to hear, but found only that unsettling calm acceptance. "Do you want to go back to town?" he asked. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Not really," she said finally. "I like it here. It's peaceful. And you're nice, even though you pretend not to be." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like a door opening that he had welded shut. "Years ago. Emma, I live very differently than most people. I don't have a television or internet or any of the things kids usually like. And I'm not good with people anymore." "That's okay," Emma said simply. "I'm not good with people either. They always leave." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was this small person who had learned the same lesson he had, who had built the same walls he had, but somehow managed to keep her capacity for wonder, for connection, for hope. "If you stayed," he said carefully, "just for a little while, just until we figure out what's best for you, there would be rules and chores, and you'd have to learn to do things the hard way." Emma's face lit up with something that might have been hope. "I'm good at rules, and I like learning things, and I already know how to work hard." Marcus looked at her standing there, in his kitchen, this small, brave person who had somehow found her way to his hidden life, and realized that maybe the mountain had provided exactly what he needed after all, even if he hadn't known he needed it. "Okay," he said. "We'll try it for a while, but Emma, if you ever want to leave, if you ever change your mind, you just have to tell me. No questions, no arguments. Deal?" "Deal," Emma said solemnly. Then she smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her, and Marcus felt his carefully constructed solitary world begin to rearrange itself around this small, fierce light. That afternoon, as he showed Emma around his property, the chicken coop, the workshop, the garden, the creek, she stopped by a patch of wildflowers and began picking the prettiest ones. Mountain laurel, Indian paintbrush, Wild lupine. Marcus watched, puzzled, as she gathered a small bouquet. What are those? For, he asked. Emma looked up at him with those pale green eyes. For you, she said simply, to say thank you. Before Marcus could respond, before he could tell her it wasn't necessary, she had stepped closer and begun carefully tucking the flowers into his beard, weaving the stems through the coarse hair. With the focused concentration of an artist. Her small fingers were gentle and sure, and Marcus found himself holding completely still, afraid to disturb her work. There, she said finally, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Now you look like the mountain in springtime. Marcus caught his reflection in the cabin window and saw himself transformed. The wild mountain hermit was still there, but now he was crowned with flowers, softened by this child's gift of beauty. He looked like something from a fairy tale, but the gentle kind. The kind where gruff guardians turn out to have hearts of gold. Thank you, Emma, he said, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. She beamed at him. You're welcome. Can we pick berries tomorrow? I want to learn how to make jam. Yes, Marcus said, touching one of the flowers in his beard, marveling at how something so simple could feel like everything was changing. We can pick berries tomorrow. 3 weeks passed like pages turning in a book. Marcus had forgotten he wanted to read. Emma settled into mountain life with the adaptability of water finding its level, and Marcus discovered that teaching someone else his hard-won skills felt like rediscovering them. Himself, she learned to gather eggs without startling the chickens, to identify edible plants versus dangerous lookalikes, and to split kindling with a hatchet sized for her small hands, a tool Marcus had spent 2 evenings crafting in his workshop, while she slept. Her questions were endless, but never frivolous. How did he know when bread dough had risen enough? Why did he plant beans next to corn? What did different bird calls mean about weather changes? Emma absorbed information like dry earth soaking up spring rain, but it was her observations that continually surprised him. She noticed that one of his chickens, Henrietta, always laid her eggs in the same corner of the coop, and suggested building a special nesting box there. She pointed out that his rain barrel collected more water when positioned at a different angle, small insights that came from watching the world with fresh eyes. But it was the morning she woke up singing that Marcus realized how profoundly his life had changed. He had been awake since dawn, as was his habit, checking the solar panels and planning the day's work. Emma typically slept until full daylight, but today he heard a soft melody drifting from the loft, something wordless and sweet that seemed to harmonize with the birdsong outside. When she climbed down the ladder, her hair sticking up in impossible directions, she was still humming. Good morning, she said, padding to the kitchen in bare feet. Can we check the berry patches today? I think some of the early ones might be ready. Marcus nodded, struck by how natural this had become, the we. The easy assumption of shared plans, the way she moved through his space as if she belonged there. Which he was beginning to realize she did. They spent the morning exploring the higher meadows where wild strawberries grew in secret clusters beneath broad leaves. Emma's basket-weaving skills were still developing, so Marcus had fashioned her a small gathering bag from canvas. She worked methodically, tasting each berry before adding it to her collection, learning to identify the perfect balance of sweetness and firmness. Marcus, she said during a break, sitting cross-legged in a patch of sunlight, were you always alone up here? The question was casual, but Marcus heard the deeper curiosity beneath it. In 3 weeks he had told her very little about his past, focusing instead on practical lessons and immediate needs. But Emma was smart, and she had undoubtedly noticed the absence of personal stories, photographs, mementos from a previous life. Not always, he said carefully. I lived in town before. Had a different life. Emma waited, understanding that this was as much as he was ready to share. It was one of her remarkable qualities. She never pushed, never demanded more than someone was willing to give. Marcus suspected this skill had been learned through necessity. In foster homes and uncertain situations where pushing too hard might mean losing what little stability she had found. But sitting there in the warm sunshine, watching her sort berries with unconscious care, Marcus found himself wanting to share more. "I was a carpenter," he said. "Built houses, cabinets, custom furniture. Had a workshop in town, employees, more work than I could handle." "That's why you're so good at building things," Emma said, not looking up from her berries. "Did you like it?" Marcus considered this. "I liked the work, creating something useful with my hands. But the business side..." He shook his head. "Too many people wanting things faster, cheaper, different than we agreed. Too many complications." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "People can be complicated. That's why I like animals better. They're honest about what they want." Marcus smiled at this observation. "What about me? Am I too complicated?" Emma looked at him seriously. "No, you're simple in a good way. You say what you mean, and you do what you say you'll do. That's not complicated. That's just reliable." The word hit Marcus unexpectedly hard. Reliable. When was the last time anyone had described him that way? When was the last time anyone had seen his need for solitude and straightforwardness as positive traits rather than social failures? That afternoon, as they processed their berry harvest, washing, sorting, preparing some for jam and others for drying, Emma announced her intention to braid flowers into Marcus's beard again. "It's been 3 days," she said matter-of-factly. "The other ones are getting wilted." Marcus had been carefully removing the dried flowers each evening, not wanting to appear unkempt, but Emma had apparently been keeping track. The ritual had become important to her, he realized, though he wasn't entirely sure why. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It's not necessary." Emma paused in her berry sorting. "I know it's not necessary, but I like doing it. It makes you look." She searched for the word. "Approachable. Like someone who might tell stories or teach you things, instead of someone who might growl and chase you away." Marcus was startled by this assessment. "Do I look like I would chase people away? Before the flowers?" "Yes, like a bear who doesn't want to be bothered. But with flowers, you look like a bear who might share his honey." The analogy was so apt that Marcus had to laugh. "And which would you prefer?" "The honey-sharing bear, obviously," Emma grinned at him. "Besides, the flowers make the bees happy when they fall out. It's like wearing a garden." So Marcus found himself sitting still once again while small fingers worked wildflowers into his beard. Today she had chosen mountain daisies, their white petals bright against the dark hair. She worked with the focused concentration he was learning to associate with all her projects, adjusting and readjusting until the arrangement satisfied her aesthetic sense. "There," she said finally. "Now you look like you belong to the mountain, instead of just living on it." The distinction seemed important to her, though Marcus wasn't entirely sure he understood it. But watching her face, seeing the satisfaction and affection there, he decided understanding could come later. For now it was enough that this small ritual brought her joy. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the western peaks, Emma broached a subject that Marcus had been dreading. "Marcus, what happens when winter comes?" He had been wondering when she would ask this. Emma was observant enough to notice the signs of seasonal preparation, the wood cutting, the food preservation, the winterizing of equipment. She had to know that mountain winters were serious business, potentially dangerous for the unprepared. "Winter is hard up here," he said honestly. "Snow starts in October, sometimes earlier. By December, we can be snowed in for days or weeks at a time. It gets cold, really cold." Emma nodded, absorbing this information. "Have you done it before? Stayed through winter?" "Every year for 15 years. By yourself?" "Yes." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Were you lonely?" The question was asked without judgment, simple curiosity. But it cut straight to something Marcus had never allowed himself to examine. Had he been lonely? He had told himself that solitude was what he wanted, what he needed. But sitting here, with Emma beside him, listening to her quiet breathing as she watched the stars emerge, Marcus realized that lonely wasn't quite the right word. He had been empty, hollow, like a house with all the furniture removed. Sometimes, he admitted. But I thought that was better than the alternative. What alternative? Being hurt by people, being disappointed, having to worry about someone else's needs and wants and problems. Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. But now you worry about my needs and wants and problems. Yes, and that's okay? Marcus looked at her, this small person who had wandered into his carefully ordered life and turned everything upside down. That's okay. Good, Emma said with satisfaction. Because I worry about yours too. That's what people do when they care about each other. The simple truth of this statement hung in the evening air like the first star appearing overhead. Marcus had forgotten, or perhaps had never learned it, that caring was meant to be reciprocal, that worry could be a form of love rather than a burden. Emma, he said carefully, if you stay through winter, and I want you to know that's your choice, it will be just us. For months, no trips to town, no other people, no normal childhood experiences. Are you sure that's what you want? Emma was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he had pushed too hard, asked for too much. But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure. Marcus, I've never had normal childhood experiences. I've had foster families who were nice and foster families who weren't. And I've had to change schools 6 times and learn new rules and new people and pretend to like things I didn't like because that's what was expected. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Here, I get to learn things that matter. I get to help with real work that makes a difference. I get to pick flowers and braid them in your beard because it makes us both happy, not because someone told me I should. She paused, looking out at the darkening forest. I've never felt like I belonged anywhere before, but I belong here. With you, if you'll have me. Marcus felt something break open in his chest, not painful, but like ice cracking in spring, making room for something new to grow. This child, who had every reason to be guarded and self-protective, was offering him trust that felt both precious and terrifying. I'll have you, he said quietly, for as long as you want to stay. Emma leaned against his arm, solid and warm in the cooling evening air. Then we'll figure out winter together. The next few weeks took on a different quality as Marcus began teaching Emma the serious business of winter preparation. She learned to recognize the signs of changing weather, to stack firewood for maximum drying and easy access, to preserve vegetables from the garden, and forage for foods that would soar well. She took to these lessons with the same focused attention she brought to everything else, but Marcus noticed she also began adding her own touches to their preparations. Flowers dried and bundled for winter color. Smooth stones collected and arranged in pleasing patterns. Small decorations woven from grass and twigs that served no practical purpose but made their cabin feel more like a home. Why do you do that? Marcus asked one evening, watching her arrange pine cones in a wooden bowl on the kitchen table. Emma looked up, considering the question. Because pretty things make hard times easier to bear, she said finally. And because when you make something beautiful, you're saying that you believe in tomorrow, that there will be someone there to see it and appreciate it. Marcus stared at her, struck by the wisdom in this simple statement. How had this 7-year-old child learned something it had taken him 4 decades to understand? That beauty wasn't frivolous or impractical, but essential, a form of hope made manifest in the physical world. That night, as Emma slept in the loft, Marcus sat at his workbench and began carving. His hands moved almost without conscious direction, shaping a piece of mountain maple into something delicate and precise. By dawn, he had created a small wooden bird, wings spread as if caught in flight, detailed enough to show individual feathers. When Emma climbed down for breakfast, she found it waiting beside her plate. "For me?" she asked, cradling the carving. In her palms. "For you," Marcus confirmed. "Because you're right about beautiful things making hard times easier." Emma's smile was brighter than the morning sun streaming through the cabin windows. She placed the wooden bird carefully on the windowsill, where it would catch the light, where she would see it first thing each morning. "Thank you," she said. "I'll keep it forever." Marcus believed her. This child who had lost so much, who had been abandoned and shuffled from place to place, understood the value of permanence, of gifts given freely without expectation of return. As they prepared breakfast together, Emma scrambling eggs while Marcus made pancakes from his own ground flour, Marcus realized that somewhere in the past month, his life had become unrecognizable. His cabin rang with conversation and laughter. His days were structured around shared meals and collaborative projects. His evenings were filled with Emma's questions and observations, with stories and songs and the comfortable silence of two people who had learned to be themselves in each other's presence. He had spent 15 years believing that solitude was safety, that isolation was peace. But this daily dance of care and consideration, this gentle interweaving of two lives into something stronger than either could be alone, this was what peace actually felt like. Outside, the first maple leaves were beginning to show hints of gold at their edges. Summer was ending, and with it, the easy season of their new life together. But Marcus found himself looking forward to winter for the first time in years. Not because he enjoyed the hardship, but because he would face it with Emma beside him, braiding flowers in his beard and filling their small cabin with beauty and hope. October arrived with a vengeance, bringing the kind of early storm that reminded Marcus why he respected the mountain's moods. The temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight, and when they woke, the world outside their windows was transformed into a crystalline wonderland that would have been beautiful if it weren't so dangerous. Emma pressed her nose to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. "It's so pretty," she whispered, "like someone threw diamonds everywhere." Marcus joined her at the window, noting the heavy way the snow clung to the pine branches, the telltale signs that this wasn't just an early dusting, but a serious weather system settling in for days. He had seen storms like this trap people for a week or more, cutting off all access to the outside world. "Pretty, yes," he agreed, "but also serious. This is the kind of snow that means business." Over the past 2 months, Marcus had been teaching Emma to read weather signs, the behavior of animals, the quality of light, the smell of the air before storms. She had proven to be a quick study, often noticing changes before he mentioned them. But this was her first real mountain storm, and he watched her face carefully for signs of fear or claustrophobia. Instead, he saw excitement. "Does this mean we're officially snowed in?" she asked, turning from the window with bright eyes. "Probably for the next few days, at least." "Good," Emma said with satisfaction. "I've been wanting to finish the quilt." Marcus smiled at her priorities. Over the past weeks, Emma had been working on a patchwork quilt made from fabric scraps she had found in his supply boxes, remnants from when he used to sew his own clothes, and canvas covers. She had taught herself basic stitching by watching him repair gear, then applied those skills to creating something purely decorative and personal. The quilt was a riot of colors and patterns that shouldn't have worked together but somehow did. Deep blue denim from old work pants, cheerful red flannel from a shirt he had worn out, forest green canvas from a tarp that had torn beyond repair. Emma had arranged them in a design that reminded Marcus of a mountain meadow in full bloom, chaotic and wild, but harmonious in a way that spoke to some deeper pattern. "While you work on that," Marcus said, "I'll get the generator running and check our supplies." First rule of mountain storms: Make sure you have everything you need before you need it. But as the day progressed, Marcus realized that being snowed in with Emma felt entirely different from the solitary confinements he had endured in previous years. Instead of the oppressive silence and endless empty hours that had characterized his winters alone, the cabin buzzed with quiet activity and companionship. Emma worked on her quilt, humming softly as she stitched, occasionally asking for help with a particularly tricky seam. Marcus repaired tools, updated his journals, and started a new wood carving, this time a small deer to match the bird he had made for Emma. They cooked together, played simple card games, and talked about everything from the physics of snowflake formation to Emma's memories of her parents. It was during one of these conversations, late on the second day of the storm, that Emma asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Marcus, do you think anyone is looking for me?" She was lying on her stomach on the floor, working on a particularly complex section of her quilt, but Marcus could hear the careful neutrality in her voice that meant the question was more important than her casual tone suggested. Marcus set down the piece of wood he had been shaping and considered his answer carefully. In truth, he had been wondering the same thing. Nearly 3 months had passed since Emma had appeared in his forest. During that time, he had kept an ear out for helicopters, search parties, any sign that someone was actively looking for a missing child. But the mountain had remained quiet. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Do you want someone to be looking for you?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her needle moving in small, precise stitches. "I keep thinking about Uncle Ray," she said finally. "About whether he told anyone what happened to me, or if he just let people think I disappeared." Marcus felt the familiar cold anger whenever Emma's uncle was mentioned. The man had abandoned a 7-year-old child in wilderness that could easily have killed her. And the more Marcus learned about Emma's life before the mountain, the more he understood that this abandonment was just the latest in a series of betrayals and disappointments. "Emma," he said carefully, "if someone were looking for you, if social services or police showed up here, what would you want to happen?" Emma set down her needle and rolled over to look at him. "Would you fight for me?" The question was asked so matter-of-factly that it took Marcus a moment to understand what she was really asking. Not whether he would physically fight, but whether he would advocate for her, whether he would stand up to authorities and institutions and declare that she belonged here, with him. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "I would fight for you." Emma nodded as if she had expected this answer. "Then I guess it doesn't matter if they're looking or not, because this is where I belong now." The simple certainty in her voice made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. This child, who had been shuffled through the system like an unwanted package, had found her place in the world on his isolated mountain. And somehow, in the process of giving her a home, she had given him something he hadn't even realized he was missing, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. On the 3rd day of the storm, Emma announced that her quilt was finished. She had been working on the final border stitches by lamplight the night before, refusing Marcus's offers of help, insisting that she wanted to complete it entirely herself. "I want to show you something," she said after breakfast, leading him to the couch where she had been working. "But you have to close your eyes." Marcus obediently closed his eyes, listening to the soft sounds of fabric being arranged and Emma's quiet movements around the room. When she told him to open them, he found himself looking at a transformation. Emma had spread her finished quilt over the back of the couch, and its wild beauty immediately changed the entire feel of the room. But more than that, she had arranged her collection of dried flowers, smooth stones, and small decorative objects around the space, creating a display that was part art installation, part shrine to the beauty they had found together on the mountain. "It's for both of us," she said, suddenly shy. "The quilt, I mean. Big enough for 2 people to share if it gets really cold. And I thought maybe it could be our first family heirloom." Family heirloom. Marcus stared at the quilt. at the careful stitches that represented hours of patient work, at the way Emma had transformed scraps and remnants into something precious and permanent. When was the last time he had owned anything that was meant to last beyond his own lifetime? When was the last time he had thought of himself as part of a family? "Emma," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "it's beautiful. You did amazing work." She beamed at his praise, but Marcus could see something else in her expression, a kind of desperate hope that this gift would be received not just with appreciation, but with understanding. She wasn't just showing him a quilt. She was showing him a future, a life where they created beautiful things together, where they built traditions and memories, where they were family in all the ways that mattered. "Thank you," he said, and pulled her into a hug that he hoped conveyed everything he couldn't quite find words for. That afternoon, as the storm finally began to clear, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He pulled out a wooden box. From the back of his closet, a box he hadn't opened in over a decade, and brought it to the kitchen table where Emma was organizing her sewing supplies. "I want to show you something," he said, echoing her words from that morning. Emma looked at the box with curious eyes. It was made of cherry wood, with dovetail joints and a smooth finish that spoke of master craftsmanship. Marcus's hands hesitated on the lid for a moment, then opened it to reveal a collection of photographs, documents, and small mementos from his life before the mountain. "These are from before," he said simply. Emma approached carefully, understanding that this was significant. The photograph showed a younger Marcus, clean-shaven, wearing button-down shirts and work boots, standing next to beautiful pieces of furniture and architectural details. There were pictures of a workshop full of sophisticated tools, of completed projects that had clearly taken months to complete, of Marcus shaking hands with satisfied customers. "You were really famous," Emma said, studying a newspaper clipping that featured one of his custom dining room sets. "People came from far away to buy your furniture." "Some did, yes." Emma picked up a photograph that showed Marcus with his arm around a woman with long blonde hair and a warm smile. They were standing in front of a house with a wraparound porch, both of them laughing at something outside the frame of the picture. "Who is she?" Emma asked gently. "Her name was Sarah," Marcus said. We were going to get married." Emma waited, sensing there was more to the story. Marcus had been teaching her patience and the value of silence, and she was applying those lessons now, giving him space to share what he was ready to share. "She died in a climbing accident," Marcus said finally, 3 days before our wedding. We were supposed to honeymoon in these mountains, and after the funeral, I came up here alone. I never left." Emma studied his face, reading the old pain there, the way grief had carved itself into the lines around his eyes. "That's why you came to the mountain. You were hiding from the sadness." It wasn't a question, and the directness of it might have felt brutal from anyone else. But from Emma, it felt like understanding. This child who had lost her parents, who had been abandoned and shuffled through an uncaring system, recognized the landscape of loss in ways that most adults couldn't. "Yes," Marcus admitted. "I thought if I came somewhere Sarah had never been, somewhere that didn't have memories, I could. I don't know, stop hurting maybe." Did it work? Marcus considered this. "For a while. But I think maybe I was just sleeping instead of living. Until you showed up." Emma carefully placed the photograph back in the box, then looked at Marcus with those two wise eyes. "Do you think Sarah would have liked me?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. In all his years of grief and isolation, he had never considered what Sarah might have thought about his life choices, about the person he had become, about Emma. But now, looking at this brave, creative, generous child who had brought so much light into his shadowy existence, he knew the answer immediately. "She would have loved you," he said with certainty. "Sarah always said that the most important thing about a person was whether they made the world more beautiful just by being in it. And you definitely do that. Emma's smile was radiant. "That I wish I could have met her. But I'm glad I got to meet you instead." The simple acceptance in her words, the way she acknowledged his loss without trying to minimize it, while still claiming her own place in his life, made Marcus realize something profound. He had spent 15 years thinking that loving someone again would be a betrayal of Sarah's memory. But Emma had shown him that love wasn't a finite resource. The heart didn't have to choose between past and present, between memory and hope. Sarah would always be part of him, would always be the reason he knew how to recognize love when he found it again. And Emma was part of him too now, woven into his daily life, as permanently as the stitches in her quilt. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Emma's new quilt spread over both of them, Marcus told her stories about Sarah for the first time. Not the painful stories of loss and grief, but the happy memories he had locked away with everything else from his previous life. Sarah's terrible cooking and her beautiful singing voice. The way she could find four-leaf clovers anywhere she looked. Her dream of having a house full of children and dogs and laughter. "She sounds wonderful," Emma said when Marcus had run out of stories. "I think she would be happy that you're not alone anymore." Marcus looked down at this child who had somehow become his daughter in every way that mattered, who had taught him that family was something you chose rather than something you were born into, and knew that Emma was right. Sarah, who had loved generously and without reservation, would have wanted him to love again. "I think she would be happy too," he agreed. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and bright under a blanket of fresh snow. But inside their warm cabin, wrapped in Emma's handmade quilt, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, perfect contentment. Not the empty peace of solitude, but the rich satisfaction of love, freely given and generously received. The mountain had provided for him, just as it always had. But this time, it had given him exactly what he needed most, a reason to come back to life. November brought visitors to the mountain, not the human kind, but the wild residents preparing for winter's harsh grip. Emma discovered she had a gift for understanding animal behavior that both impressed and worried Marcus. She could predict when the deer would come to drink from the creek, knew which trees the squirrels favored for their winter caches, and somehow convinced a family of foxes to let her observe them from just 20 feet away. "They know I won't hurt them," she explained when Marcus questioned her uncanny ability to get close to creatures that normally fled from any human presence. "Animals can sense intentions, you taught me that." Marcus had taught her that, but he hadn't expected her to apply the lesson quite so literally. Watching Emma sit motionless for an hour to earn the trust of a red fox, or seeing her leave small offerings of nuts and seeds that the squirrels would accept, he began to understand that her connection to the natural world went deeper than mere observation. It was this gift that led to their first real crisis since Emma had arrived. The morning started normally enough. Marcus was in his workshop, crafting a new set of snowshoes sized for Emma's feet, when he heard her calling his name with an urgency that made him drop his tools and run outside. He found her kneeling beside a massive black bear that was clearly in distress. The animal was lying on its side, breathing heavily, with what appeared to be a deep gash across its flank. Blood stained the snow beneath it, and Marcus could see the bear's eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. "Emma, get away from there," Marcus said sharply, but she held up a hand to stop him. "She's hurt," Emma said quietly. "And she's pregnant. She needs help." Marcus approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him that this was dangerous. Black bears could be unpredictable under normal circumstances, and a wounded, pregnant female was potentially lethal. But as he got closer, he saw what Emma had seen. This wasn't an aggressive animal, but a creature in desperate need. "She has a wire around her leg," Emma continued, pointing to where a snare trap had cut deep into the bear's hindquarters. "It's infected. She's been dragging it for days." Marcus crouched down, still maintaining a respectful distance, and assessed the situation. Emma was right. This was clearly a snare set by poachers, illegal on this part of the mountain. The wire had cut through fur and flesh, and the wound showed signs of serious infection. Without intervention, the bear would likely die, along with whatever cubs she was carrying. "Emma, I need you to go back to the cabin," Marcus said calmly. "Get my largest medical kit, the wire cutters from the workshop, and some of that antibiotic powder I use on the chickens." "I'm not leaving her," Emma said with quiet determination. Marcus looked at his 7-year-old daughter, and that's what she was now. He realized, daughter in every sense that mattered, sitting fearlessly beside a 300-pound predator, radiating the same calm confidence he had seen her use with smaller animals. The bear's breathing had actually slowed since Emma had begun speaking to her in soft, soothing tones. "All right," he said. "But you stay exactly where you are, and if I tell you to move, you move immediately. No questions, no arguments, understood?" Emma nodded solemnly. Understood. What followed was the most nerve-wracking hour of Marcus's life. With Emma maintaining her gentle vigil, speaking constantly to the bear in a voice too low for Marcus to hear the words, but carrying a tone of pure compassion, he worked to free the animal from the cruel trap. The wire had embedded so deeply that he had to cut through layers of infected tissue to reach it. The bear flinched and groaned but didn't struggle, as if she understood that this pain was temporary and necessary. Emma's presence seemed to have a genuinely calming effect, her small hand resting lightly on the bear's massive head while Marcus worked. When the trap finally came free, followed by a gush of infected blood and pus, Marcus quickly cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies meant for much smaller injuries. It wasn't veterinary quality care, but it was better than nothing. "She needs rest and clean water," Emma said as Marcus finished bandaging the wound with strips torn from an old sheet. "And food. She's too weak to hunt." Marcus looked at their unexpected patient, who was already breathing easier without the constricting wire. "Emma, we can't keep a bear as a pet. Even if we could help her, she belongs in the wild." "I know that," Emma said patiently. "But she can't go back to the wild until she's stronger. And her babies." Emma placed her hand gently on the bear's swollen side. "They're coming soon, maybe tonight." Marcus stared at her. "How can you possibly know that?" Emma shrugged. "I can feel them moving. They're getting ready." As if to confirm Emma's prediction, the bear suddenly groaned and shifted, her body contracting in what was unmistakably labor. Marcus felt a moment of pure panic. He was a carpenter turned hermit, not a veterinarian, and he certainly had no experience with bear obstetrics, but Emma seemed to know exactly what to do. She positioned herself near the bear's head, continuing her soft murmur of comfort, while Marcus found himself reluctantly assisting with one of the most extraordinary experiences of his life. The first cub was born just after sunset, a tiny black form barely larger than a guinea pig. The mother bear, exhausted from her ordeal, seemed too weak to respond, so Emma gently cleaned the cub with soft cloths and helped it find its way to nurse. A second cub followed an hour later, then a third. 3 babies, Emma whispered in wonder, watching the tiny creatures instinctively seek warmth and milk. She did so good. Marcus looked at this impossible scene, his 7-year-old daughter midwifing a bare birth in his front yard, the massive mother animal trusting them completely with her most vulnerable moment, 3 new lives beginning their existence under his protection, and realized that his quiet mountain existence had just become infinitely more complicated. They spent the night in shifts, Emma insisting on taking the first watch despite Marcus's protests. When he relieved her at midnight, he found her curled up against the bear's side like she might snuggle with a large dog, both of them breathing peacefully in the cold night air. "She trusts me," Emma explained when Marcus gently shook her awake, "and I promised I wouldn't leave her alone with the babies." Over the next 3 days, Marcus found himself running an impromptu wildlife rehabilitation center. The mother bear, who Emma had named Luna, gradually regained her strength with rest, clean water, and the fish Marcus caught from the creek. The cubs grew visibly stronger, their eyes opening and their movements becoming more coordinated. Emma appointed herself head nurse, monitoring Luna's wound, ensuring the cubs were nursing properly, and maintaining her constant vigil of gentle conversation and reassurance. She slept outside in a sleeping bag, refusing to leave her patients even when the temperature dropped below freezing. "She's not just a bear to you, is she?" Marcus asked on the third evening, watching Emma carefully check Luna's bandages. Emma looked up at him with serious eyes. "She's a mother who almost lost her babies. Like my mom almost lost me in the car accident, except Mom didn't make it." She paused, stroking Luna's massive head. "I couldn't save my parents, but maybe I can save her." Marcus felt his heart break a little at this confession. Emma's fierce dedication to Luna wasn't just about her gift with animals. It was about healing, about second chances, about refusing to let another mother die if she could prevent it. But as Luna grew stronger, Marcus knew they faced an inevitable reality. Wild animals belonged in the wild, and keeping a bear family was neither safe nor sustainable. Luna was already showing signs of restlessness, and the cubs were becoming more active and curious about their surroundings. "Emma," he said gently, on the fourth morning, "Luna is getting better. She'll be ready to go back to the forest soon." Emma nodded, but Marcus could see tears threatening in her eyes. "I know, I just ... I'll miss them." "That's what makes you special," Marcus said, pulling her into a hug. "You can love something enough to let it go when that's what's best for it." That afternoon, Luna made the decision for them. She stood up for the first time since her rescue, tested her injured leg, and began making the low huffing sounds that Marcus recognized as bear communication. The cubs responded immediately, scrambling over each other to stay close to their mother. Emma sat quietly watching as Luna gathered her babies and began moving slowly toward the tree line. The bear paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back, as if saying goodbye, before disappearing into the forest with her family. "Do you think we'll see them again?" Emma asked, wiping her eyes. "Maybe," Marcus said. "Luna will remember your kindness. And bears have excellent memories." That evening, as they cleaned up the makeshift outdoor nursery and returned their supplies to normal storage, Emma was unusually quiet. Marcus recognized the signs of deep thinking, Emma's way of processing significant experiences. "I've been wondering something," she said finally as they sat by the fire. "Do you think there's a reason I ended up here? Like not just lost in the forest, but specifically here with you?" Marcus considered the question seriously. In his previous life, he might have dismissed such thoughts as wishful thinking or childish fantasy. But living with Emma had taught him to pay attention to patterns, to connections that might seem coincidental but felt deeper than chance. "What kind of reason?" he asked. Emma stared into the flames, gathering her thoughts. "Well, you needed someone to remind you that caring about people isn't always painful. And I needed someone who would choose me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And Luna needed both of us, your practical skills and my ... whatever it is I have with animals." She paused, then continued with the startling insight that never failed to amaze Marcus. "Maybe the mountain doesn't just provide what we need for survival. Maybe it provides what we need for healing." Marcus looked at this remarkable child who had wandered into his life and transformed everything about it. Emma, who could gentle wild animals and create beauty from scraps, who faced hardship with courage and offered love without reservation, who somehow always knew exactly what needed to be said or done. "You might be right," he said quietly. "The mountain brought you to me, and me to you, and both of us to Luna when she needed us most. That's a lot of coincidences." Emma smiled, the first truly happy expression she'd worn since Luna left. "Not coincidences. Connections. The mountain is full of them, if you know how to look." That night, as Marcus listened to Emma's peaceful breathing. From the loft, he reflected on how profoundly his understanding of the world had shifted. 6 months ago, he had been a man hiding from life, convinced that solitude was the only protection against pain. Now he was part of something larger, a web of connections that included not just Emma, but the entire ecosystem of the mountain they called home. He thought about Luna and her cubs, safely denned somewhere in the forest, alive because Emma had refused to walk past suffering without stopping to help. He thought about the townspeople far below, who still called him the Mountain Man but had no idea that his isolation had ended, that love had found him in the most unexpected form. Most of all, he thought about the flowers Emma braided into his beard each week, transforming his fearsome appearance into something gentle and approachable. It was such a small gesture, but it represented everything about their relationship, the way they had softened each other's sharp edges, the way they had learned to be family not through blood or law but through daily choice and constant care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to practice the love they had built together. Winter was approaching in earnest, and they would face it as they faced everything now, together, with trust and tenderness and the absolute certainty that they belonged to each other and to this mountain that had brought them home. December arrived with a silence so profound it seemed to muffle even thoughts. The heavy snows had begun in earnest, transforming their mountain into a crystalline fortress cut off from the world below. Marcus had experienced this isolation many times before, but never with such a sense of completeness. Where once the winter silence had felt oppressive, now it felt protective, a white cocoon wrapped around their small family of two. Emma had adapted to winter life with the same grace she brought to everything else. She learned to read the subtle signs that meant more snow was coming, to bank the fire properly for maximum heat efficiency, and to move through the cabin with the quiet consideration necessary when two people shared a small space for months at a time. But it was her innovations that truly impressed Marcus. She had discovered that hanging mirrors strategically around the cabin could bounce natural light into darker corners, making their space feel larger and brighter during the short winter days. She created indoor gardens from sprouted seeds, filling mason jars with green shoots that brought life to their windowsills. Most remarkably, she had begun what she called story quilts, small textile pieces that depicted scenes from their life together, stitched during the long evening hours when the wind howled outside their walls. "This one is the day we met," she explained, showing Marcus a square of fabric where she had embroidered a tiny figure in a torn dress standing beside a creek, while a larger figure watched from behind stylized trees. "And this one is Luna and her babies." The quilts were primitive in technique but sophisticated in emotional content. Each square told a story, and together they were creating a visual record of their life that was more meaningful than any photograph could have been. It was while working on these story quilts that Emma first mentioned the dreams. "I've been having dreams about town," she said one evening, her needle moving in careful stitches as she added flowers to Marcus's embroidered beard. "About people talking about us." Marcus looked up from the knife he was sharpening. In the months since Emma's arrival, he had pushed thoughts of the outside world so far from his mind that hearing her mention town felt almost surreal. "What kind of talking?" he asked carefully. Emma concentrated on her stitching for a moment before answering. "They're not bad dreams, just curious ones. Like, there's this lady at a store who keeps asking Henrik about whether he's seen the Mountain Man lately. And there are children who dare each other to walk up the mountain road." Henrik, that would be the hardware store owner Marcus had occasionally traded with in his early years on the mountain. But Emma couldn't possibly know about Henrik unless— "Emma, these dreams, are they about real people? People you've never met?" Emma's needle paused. "I think so. The lady has gray hair and braids, and she wears glasses that slip down her nose. And Henrik has a beard, but not as long as yours, and he has a dog named Buster who sleeps by the wood stove." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Emma's description of Henrik and his dog was absolutely accurate, down to details she couldn't have known from any source other than direct observation. But more unsettling was the implication that people in town were asking about him, were curious about the mountain man after years of simply accepting his existence as a local oddity. "Have you had dreams like this before?" Marcus asked. Emma shrugged. "Sometimes. Usually about animals or weather or places I've never been. My foster families thought it was just imagination, but the dreams always felt different, more real than regular dreams." Marcus had heard of such things, people who seemed to have access to information beyond their normal senses. Sarah had been like that sometimes, knowing things before they happened, sensing moods and intentions in ways that seemed almost supernatural. He had learned not to question it, simply to trust that some people were more attuned to the subtle currents of the world than others. "What else do your dreams tell you about town?" he asked. Emma resumed her stitching, considering the question. "There's going to be a big storm after Christmas. Bigger than anything we've had so far. And someone is going to come looking for us. Looking for us specifically." "Looking for me," Emma corrected. "But they'll find us." Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. "Emma, if you don't want to be found, if you want to stay here, I won't let anyone take you away." Emma looked up at him with those two wise eyes. "I know you wouldn't." "But Marcus, what if they're not coming to take me away? What if they're coming because they need help?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from the fire. Marcus had spent so many years thinking of the outside world as a threat to be avoided that he had never considered it might need something from him. But Emma, with her gift for seeing connections and patterns, was suggesting a different possibility. "What kind of help?" he asked. "I don't know yet. The dreams aren't that clear, but I think maybe our time of just being hidden is ending. Maybe it's time to start being helpful instead." Over the next few weeks, Emma's dreams became more frequent and detailed. She dreamed of children in town who were sick with something the doctors couldn't identify. She dreamed of elderly people trapped in homes without heat when the power lines failed. She dreamed of search and rescue teams struggling to reach people in need because they didn't know the mountain well enough to navigate safely in severe weather. "They need someone who knows the mountain," Emma said one morning after a particularly vivid dream. "Someone who can guide them, help them reach people who are in trouble." Marcus realized what she was suggesting. "Emma, I haven't been around people in years. I don't know if I remember how to be helpful to strangers." Emma smiled at him with gentle confidence. "You helped me. And you helped Luna. And you've been helping me learn everything I need to know to survive up here. You're one of the most helpful people I've ever met. You just need to remember that helping doesn't always hurt." The truth of this observation struck Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent so many years equating involvement with pain that he had forgotten his fundamental nature. He was someone who fixed things, who built solutions, who took raw materials and turned them into something useful and beautiful. That hadn't changed when he came to the mountain. He had simply redirected those skills towards solitary survival instead of community service. But what if Emma was right? What if his years of mountain living had prepared him not for permanent isolation, but for a different kind of usefulness? He knew these mountains better than anyone. He knew how to survive in conditions that would kill inexperienced people. He knew how to build, repair, navigate, and endure. And he had Emma, whose gifts complemented his own in ways that made them more capable together than either could be alone. The test of Emma's prophetic dreams came 3 days after Christmas. Marcus woke to the sound of wind that seemed to carry a different quality than normal winter storms. The air pressure felt wrong, and the snow was falling with an intensity that spoke of a serious weather system settling in for an extended stay. "This is it," Emma said quietly, standing at the window and watching the snow fall in thick, straight lines. "This is the storm from my dreams." By noon, the storm had intensified beyond anything Marcus had experienced in his 15 years on the mountain. The wind was strong enough to shake their solid cabin, and the snow was falling so heavily that visibility beyond their porch was nearly zero. This wasn't just a winter storm, it was a blizzard with the potential to trap or kill anyone caught unprepared. And somewhere down in the valley, people were in trouble. Marcus spent the afternoon preparing equipment he hadn't used in years. His emergency medical supplies, camping gear rated for extreme weather, ropes and climbing hardware, emergency food and water. Emma helped without being asked, understanding instinctively what they would need. "How do you know they'll come today?" Marcus asked as he checked his snowshoes for wear and damage. "Because this is when they'll realize they need help," Emma said simply. "When the storm gets so bad that normal rescue methods won't work." As if summoned by her words, they heard the distant sound of an engine struggling against the storm. Marcus looked out to see headlights moving slowly up the mountain road, weaving back and forth as the driver fought to maintain control on the treacherous surface. The vehicle that finally pulled into their clearing was a county sheriff's truck, its four-wheel drive barely adequate for the conditions. Two people climbed out, a middle-aged woman in uniform and a younger man wearing the gear of a paramedic. Both looked exhausted and desperate. Marcus opened his door before they could knock, Emma beside him despite the cold wind that immediately filled their warm cabin with snow. "Are you Marcus Thorne?" the woman called over the wind. "The one they call the Mountain Man?" Marcus felt Emma's small hand slip into his, offering support and encouragement. He squeezed it gently, then stepped forward to meet these strangers who had somehow tracked him down in the worst storm in years. "I am," he said simply. "What do you need?" The relief on the woman's face was unmistakable. "Sheriff Janet Rodriguez," she said, extending a gloved hand. "This is Tom Bradley from County Emergency Services. We have multiple people trapped by the storm, elderly residents without power, a family with a sick child who can't get to the hospital, hikers who were caught in the backcountry. Our regular rescue teams can't reach them in these conditions." "But you think I can," Marcus said. "We know these mountains are your home," Tom Bradley said. "And we know you've survived worse storms than this. We're hoping you might be willing to help us save some lives." Marcus looked at these two people who had risked their own safety to climb his mountain in a blizzard, asking for help rather than demanding it, acknowledging his expertise rather than dismissing it. Then he looked down at Emma, whose green eyes were bright with anticipation rather than fear. "We'll help," he said, and felt something shift in his chest as he spoke the words. "Tell me where they are." As Sheriff Rodriguez spread a map on their kitchen table and began describing the locations where people were trapped, Marcus realized that Emma had been right about everything. The time for hiding was over. The mountain had spent 15 years teaching him skills he thought were for his own survival, but now he understood their true purpose. He wasn't the Mountain Man because he lived alone on the mountain. He was the Mountain Man because he belonged to the mountain, and the mountain needed him to protect the people who depended on it. Emma began gathering supplies with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. As she packed medical supplies and emergency food, she looked up at Marcus with a smile that transformed her young face into something radiant. "Ready?" she asked. Marcus shouldered his pack, checked his equipment one final time, and looked around the cabin that had been his refuge for so many years. It would still be here when they returned, but he suspected that when they did, both he and Emma would be different people. "Ready," he said, and opened the door to step back into the world. The blizzard had transformed the familiar mountain into an alien landscape, where every landmark was buried under shifting white chaos. Marcus moved through the storm with the confident stride of someone reading a map written in snow and wind, while Emma followed in his tracks with the quiet determination that had become her signature. Behind them, Sheriff Rodriguez and paramedic Tom Bradley struggled to keep pace. Their modern winter gear no match for the conditions that Marcus and Emma navigated as if they were walking through their own backyard. Their first destination was the Henderson cabin, where 83-year-old Walter Henderson and his wife Dorothy were trapped without power or heat. The cabin sat in a hollow 3 miles from the main road, accessible only by a narrow trail that was now completely obscured by drifting snow. "How do you know where we're going?" Tom shouted over the wind as Marcus led them unerringly through what appeared to be featureless wilderness. Marcus pointed to a cluster of pine trees whose tops were barely visible through the snow. Those trees marked the ridgeline that runs parallel to Henderson's driveway. Follow the ridge for 200 yards, then drop down into the hollow when you see the old lightning-struck oak. Emma added her own navigation wisdom, and the wind sounds different when you're near buildings. It echoes off the walls and roof. Listen. Tom strained to hear what she meant, and gradually became aware of a subtle change in the storm's voice. Slight dampening and redirection of the wind that suggested they were approaching shelter. The Henderson cabin emerged from the blizzard like a ship materializing from fog. Smoke rose from the chimney, which Marcus took as a good sign. They had managed to keep their wood-burning fireplace going, but no lights showed in the windows, confirming the power outage. Walter Henderson answered Marcus's knock with a combination of surprise and profound relief. The elderly man was wearing multiple layers of clothing and moved with the careful stiffness of someone who had been cold for too long. "My God," he said, staring at Marcus as if he were seeing a ghost. "You're real. I always wondered if the stories were true." "The stories?" Marcus asked, helping Dorothy Henderson wrap herself in the warm blankets Emma had brought from their pack. "About the mountain man," Dorothy explained, her voice shaky from cold and relief. "People in town have been talking about you for years. Some say you're 7 feet tall, others that you can predict the weather days in advance. Henrik at the hardware store swears you once traded him furniture for supplies that was so beautiful it belonged in a museum." Marcus glanced at Emma, who was already assessing the elderly couple with the practical eye she had developed during their care of Luna. The Hendersons were suffering from mild hypothermia and dehydration, but nothing that couldn't be treated with warmth, fluids, and proper care. "They need to come with us," Emma announced quietly to Marcus. "Mrs. Henderson has that gray color on her lips that means she's not getting enough oxygen. And Mr. Henderson's hands are shaking too much. That's not just cold." Tom Bradley, who had been doing his own medical assessment, nodded in agreement. "She's right. They need hospital care, but we can't get them down the mountain in this storm." Marcus considered their options. The Henderson cabin was solid, but inadequately insulated for this level of cold without electric heat. His own cabin had backup heating systems, better insulation, and sufficient supplies to care for additional people. But moving 2 elderly individuals through a blizzard carried its own risks. "We can do it," Emma said, reading his thoughts with the accuracy that never failed to amaze him. "The trail back to our place follows the creek most of the way. Even in the snow, I can hear where the water is running. And we have the emergency sled." Marcus had indeed brought the emergency sled, a lightweight but sturdy rescue device he had built years ago and never expected to use. Within 20 minutes, they had the Hendersons bundled in sleeping bags on the sled, with Emma leading the way by listening for the creek's voice beneath the snow, and Marcus and Tom pulling their precious cargo through the storm. The journey back to Marcus's cabin took twice as long as the trip out, but they arrived safely to find Sheriff Rodriguez maintaining the fire and heating water for hot drinks. The Hendersons were installed in the warmest part of the cabin, given dry clothes and warm food, and within an hour their color had returned to normal. "You saved our lives," Dorothy Henderson said simply, holding Emma's hand in both of hers. "I don't know how to thank you." Emma smiled with the unself-conscious grace that made everyone love her instantly. "You don't have to thank us. That's what neighbors do." But their rescue work was far from over. The storm was intensifying, and 2 more emergencies waited in the darkness. The Morrison family, parents and 3 young children, were stranded in their car on the mountain highway when their vehicle slid off the road and became trapped in a snowdrift. More critically, their youngest child, 4-year-old Sarah Morrison, was running a high fever that had her parents panicked. "The road is completely impassable," Sheriff Rodriguez reported after trying to radio for additional help. "Even the snow plows can't get through. And the little girl's temperature is 104 degrees. Her parents are terrified." Emma looked at Marcus with eyes that held both determination and something that might have been precious. "We have to reach them tonight. The fever will get worse if we wait." Marcus knew she was right, but reaching a stranded car on the main highway meant traveling through terrain that was both unfamiliar and exposed to the worst of the storm's fury. Unlike the forest trails he knew intimately, the highway offered no natural landmarks or shelter. "How do we find them in this?" Tom asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. Emma tilted her head as if listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. "The little girl is crying. Not out loud, she's too weak for that. But I can sense her distress. If we get close enough, I can guide us to her." Marcus had long ago stopped questioning Emma's unusual abilities. If she said she could sense the child's distress, then she could. The question was whether they could reach the general vicinity safely enough for her gift to be useful. "There's an old logging road that parallels the highway," Marcus said, calling up mental maps he hadn't referenced in years. "It's closer to the tree line, more sheltered from the wind. If we can follow it to approximately where they went off the road, I can find them from there." Emma finished confidently. The journey to reach the Morrison family was the most challenging rescue of the night. The logging road was buried under 4 feet of snow, forcing Marcus to break trail with snowshoes while Emma followed in his tracks, periodically stopping to listen for the subtle signals that guided her navigation. Sheriff Rodriguez and Tom brought up the rear, carrying medical supplies and emergency equipment. Twice they had to shelter behind rock outcroppings when the wind became too fierce to continue. During these brief respites, Emma would close her eyes and extend her senses, fine-tuning their direction based on impressions that seemed to come from some deep intuitive connection to the people they were trying to save. "They're scared," she reported during one of these stops. "The parents are trying to stay calm for the children, but they're running out of gas for the heater, and the little girl is getting worse." "How much further?" Marcus asked. Emma pointed through the swirling snow toward a section of forest that looked identical to every other section they had passed. "Maybe half a mile. The car is blue, and it's tilted on its side against some trees." When they finally spotted the Morrison vehicle, exactly as Emma had described, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for this remarkable child who had become his daughter and partner in ways he never could have imagined. The car was indeed blue, tilted at a precarious angle against a cluster of pine trees, barely visible through the storm. Jim Morrison, a man in his 30s with the hollow-eyed look of someone who had been fighting panic for hours, nearly cried when he saw their rescue party emerging from the blizzard. "Thank God," he said, his voice breaking. "Sarah's burning up, and we couldn't get the car started again. I was starting to think ... "You don't have to think about that anymore," Emma said gently, immediately moving to the back seat where little Sarah Morrison lay listless in her mother's arms. "We're here to help." Tom Bradley quickly assessed the child's condition while Emma provided the kind of calm, reassuring presence that seemed to ease fear in everyone around her. Sarah's fever was indeed dangerous, but she was conscious and responsive. Serious, but not critical if they could get her proper medical attention. "We need to get her warm and get this fever down," Tom announced. "And we need to do it fast." Marcus had anticipated this need. His pack contained not just emergency medical supplies, but also a portable heating unit, powered by small fuel cells technology he had acquired years ago for just such situations. Within minutes, they had created a warm shelter using the overturned car as a windbreak and emergency tarps as walls. Emma took charge of keeping the other Morrison children calm while the adults worked to stabilize Sarah's condition. She told them stories about her life on the mountain, about Luna and her cubs, about the small daily adventures that made up her world with Marcus. The children listened with wide eyes, momentarily forgetting their fear as Emma painted pictures of a life that seemed magical compared to their current predicament. "Are you really the mountain man's daughter?" 8-year-old Jake Morrison asked Emma during a break in her storytelling. Emma glanced at Marcus, who was monitoring Sarah's vital signs with Tom. "Yes," she said simply. "He adopted me when I needed a family, and I adopted him when he needed one too." The simple truth of this statement made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. That was exactly what had happened. They had adopted each other through choice and love rather than law or biology. Creating a family bond that was stronger than either genetics or paperwork could provide. By the time they had stabilized Sarah's condition enough for transport, the storm was finally beginning to show signs of weakening. The wind had dropped from a howl to a steady moan, and the snow, while still falling heavily, was no longer the horizontal barrage that had made travel nearly impossible. Getting the Morrison family back to Marcus's cabin required 2 trips. First for Sarah and her mother, the second for Jim Morrison and the other children. By dawn, Marcus's one-room cabin had been transformed into an impromptu refugee center, housing 2 elderly people, a family of 5, 2 law enforcement officers, and 1 remarkable little girl who moved between all of them with the confidence of someone who had found her calling. Emma made breakfast for everyone, brewing coffee and cooking eggs and pancakes on Marcus's wood stove while regaling their guests with stories that made their ordeal seem like an adventure rather than a crisis. She checked on the Hendersons' condition, played quiet games with the Morrison children, and somehow managed to make a cabin built for 2 people feel spacious enough for 10. "How does she do it?" Sheriff Rodriguez asked Marcus quietly, watching Emma demonstrate her flower braiding technique to young Jake Morrison. "She's 7 years old, but she handles emergencies like a seasoned professional." Marcus watched his daughter, and that's what she was, completely and permanently, as she patiently guided Jake's small fingers through the process of weaving wildflowers she had dried from their summer collection. "She's been through enough hard things to know that panicking doesn't help," Marcus said. "And she has a gift for seeing what people need most. Sometimes that's medical care, sometimes it's warmth and food, and sometimes it's just someone who believes everything will be okay." "She gets that from you," Sheriff Rodriguez observed. Marcus shook his head. "No, she had that when she found me. I just provided a safe place for it to grow." As the rescued families rested and recovered, Marcus found himself thinking about the transformation that had occurred overnight. For 15 years, his cabin had been a place of solitude and self-protection. Now it was filled with voices and laughter, with the simple chaos of multiple families sharing space, with the satisfaction that came from using his skills to save lives rather than simply maintain isolation. Emma appeared at his elbow, having finished her flower braiding lesson. "How do you feel?" she asked, studying his face with her usual intensity. "Different," Marcus admitted. "Good different, but different." Emma nodded as if she had expected this answer. "The mountain brought us people who needed help, just like it brought me to you when I needed help. I think maybe we're not supposed to hide anymore." Marcus looked around at their cabin full of grateful people, at Emma standing beside him with flowers in her pocket and infinite wisdom in her green eyes, and realized she was right. The time for hiding was over. They had work to do in the world, and the mountain had spent months preparing them for it. "No," he agreed, pulling Emma into a gentle hug. "I don't think we're supposed to hide anymore either. The morning after the storm dawned with the crystalline clarity that only comes after nature has exhausted itself. Sunlight poured through Marcus's windows, illuminating a cabin that looked like the aftermath of a very successful sleepover party. The Hendersons were sharing the couch, wrapped in Emma's handmade quilt and drinking coffee from Marcus's best mugs. The Morrison children had arranged themselves on sleeping bags near the fire, playing a quiet card game while their parents spoke in low voices with Sheriff Rodriguez about insurance claims and towing services. Emma moved through it all like a graceful conductor orchestrating a complex symphony, checking on everyone's needs, refilling coffee cups, and somehow managing to braid fresh flowers into Marcus's beard while balancing a toddler on her hip. Where did she get flowers in the middle of winter? Tom Bradley asked, staring at the delicate white blooms woven through Marcus's dark hair. She dries them in summer, Marcus explained, unconsciously touching one of the flowers. Keeps them in special boxes she made herself. Says everyone needs beauty, even in the hardest seasons. Tom shook his head in amazement. That kid is something else. I've been a paramedic for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone handle crisis situations the way she does. It's like she knows exactly what each person needs to feel safe again. Marcus watched Emma demonstrate origami to Jake Morrison, folding scraps of paper into birds and flowers with the same focused attention she brought to everything else. She sees connections that most people miss. Between people, between needs, between what is and what could be. As the day progressed and road crews finally cleared enough snow for vehicles to move safely, their guests began the process of returning to their normal lives. But before they left, something remarkable happened. Walter Henderson, who had been quiet most of the morning, stood up with the careful dignity of his 83 years and cleared his throat for attention. I need to say something, he announced to the room. Dorothy and I have been living on this mountain for 47 years. We've seen good neighbors and bad neighbors, and we've learned to tell the difference. He looked directly at Marcus. What you and Emma did last night, risking your own safety to save strangers in a storm, that's not something you forget. That's not something you can repay. Dorothy Henderson nodded emphatically. We want everyone in town to know who you really are. Not the stories and rumors, but the truth. You're not just the mountain man anymore. You're Marcus Thorne, and you're a hero. Marcus felt his face flush with uncomfortable attention. I'm not a hero. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly what makes you a hero, Jim Morrison said, speaking up from where he sat with little Sarah on his lap. Her fever had broken during the night, and she was once again the bright-eyed 4-year-old her parents knew and loved. Heroes don't think about whether they're being heroic. They just see people who need help, and they help. Emma looked up from her origami demonstration with a smile that lit up the entire room. See? I told you the mountain brought us people who needed help, and helping them helped us too. Sheriff Rodriguez, who had been documenting the night's events for her official report, closed her notebook and looked at Marcus with professional respect. The county is going to want to offer you a position. Emergency rescue consultant, something like that. Your knowledge of these mountains, combined with Emma's unique abilities, could save a lot of lives. Marcus felt a moment of panic at the thought of official employment, regular schedules, bureaucratic oversight. But then he looked at Emma, who was watching him with patient confidence, and realized that accepting help from the outside world didn't mean giving up their independence. What would that involve? He asked carefully. Mainly what you did last night, Sheriff Rodriguez explained. Being available when weather or terrain makes normal rescue operations impossible. Training other rescue personnel in mountain survival. Maybe consulting on emergency preparedness for remote residents. Emma nodded encouragingly. We could help people learn to be safer up here, and we could still live the way we want to live. As their guests prepared to leave, each family took time to thank Emma specifically for her care and kindness. The Morrison children made her promise to visit them in town soon. Dorothy Henderson pressed a jar of homemade jam into her hands, saying it was payment for all the stories Emma had told during the long night. Tom Bradley left his business card and asked if she would consider letting him teach her formal first aid techniques. "You have instincts that can't be taught," he told her. "But if you learned proper medical procedures to go with those instincts, you could save even more lives." Emma accepted all these offers with the gracious maturity that never failed to amaze Marcus. She understood, perhaps better than anyone else, that their time of complete isolation was ending. But that didn't mean their special life together had to change in any fundamental way. After everyone had gone and the cabin was restored to its normal quiet order, Marcus and Emma sat on their porch in the warm afternoon sun, watching the snow melt from the trees in tiny diamond showers. "Do you regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "Having all those people in our space, being discovered?" Marcus considered the question seriously. 24 hours ago, the idea of strangers in his cabin would have filled him with anxiety. The noise, the chaos, the invasion of his carefully protected privacy, it should have been overwhelming. Instead, it had felt like coming alive. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. It felt right, like we were doing what we were supposed to be doing." Emma nodded with satisfaction. "I knew you'd feel that way. You're happiest when you're fixing things or building things or helping things grow. People are just another kind of thing that sometimes needs fixing." The simplicity of this observation made Marcus laugh. "Is that your philosophy of life? People are things that sometimes need fixing?" "Part of it," Emma said seriously. "The other part is that fixing things for other people fixes something in yourself too. Like how helping Luna made me feel better about not being able to save my parents. Or how taking care of all those people last night made you remember that. You like taking care of people." Marcus stared at his 7-year-old daughter, once again marveling at the depth of wisdom contained in such a small person. "When did you get so smart about feelings?" Emma shrugged. "Feelings aren't that complicated if you pay attention to them instead of trying to hide from them. You taught me that, even though you didn't know you were teaching it." Over the following weeks, word of their rescue mission spread through the town of Cedar Ridge with the efficiency of small-town gossip networks. But instead of the wild stories and exaggerated rumors that had characterized talk about the mountain man for years, the news stories were grounded in truth and filled with gratitude. Henrik from the hardware store drove up to their cabin personally, bringing supplies and an offer to establish regular trading arrangements. "The whole town's talking about what you did," he told Marcus, while Buster the dog immediately gravitated toward Emma as if recognizing a kindred spirit. "People want to help you however they can." Dr. Patricia Chen, the town's only physician, made the trek to their cabin to check on Emma's health and offer medical training. "Tom Bradley told me about your intuitive diagnostic abilities," she told Emma over hot chocolate and cookies. "With proper training, you could be an incredible asset to our medical team." Most surprisingly, the elementary school principal, Ms. Angela Foster, arrived with a proposition that took both Marcus and Emma completely off guard. "We've heard about Emma's intelligence and maturity," Ms. Foster explained, sitting in their kitchen and accepting Marcus's offer of coffee. "Several of our families have children who struggle with traditional classroom learning. We'd like to offer Emma the opportunity to participate in our education program, while also allowing her to help other children who might benefit from her unique perspective." Emma listened to this proposal with the careful attention she gave. "To all important decisions, would I have to come every day? And sit in rows? And take tests about things that don't matter?" Ms. Foster smiled at Emma's directness. "We could arrange something flexible. Maybe 2 or 3 days a week with projects that interest you, and opportunities to work with children who need extra help with confidence or social skills." Marcus watched Emma's face as she considered this offer. He could see her weighing the benefits of formal education against the freedom of their mountain life, the chance to help other children against the risk of being pressured to conform to expectations that didn't fit her nature. "Could Marcus come sometimes?" Emma asked finally. "To teach things about building and surviving and taking care of animals." "I think the school board would be very interested in that possibility," Ms. Foster said diplomatically. That evening, as they discussed the various offers and opportunities that had emerged from their one night of rescue work, Emma made an observation that crystallized everything Marcus had been feeling. "People down in town aren't so different from animals up here," she said, working on a new story quilt square that depicted their cabin surrounded by grateful visitors. "They just want to feel safe and cared for and like they belong somewhere. And when you help them feel those things, they want to help you feel them too." Marcus realized she was describing community, the thing he had run from 15 years ago, convinced it was a source of pain and disappointment. But Emma, with her gift for seeing connections and patterns, had recognized that community could also be a source of strength and purpose. "So what do you think we should do?" Marcus asked. "About the job offers, the school, all of it?" Emma sat down her sewing and looked at him with those wise green eyes. "I think we should do what feels right and not worry too much about what other people expect. The mountain will still be here. Our cabin will still be home. But maybe home can be bigger than just this one place." She paused, then added with a smile, "Besides, someone has to teach the people in town how to braid flowers properly. I've seen their attempts, and they're terrible." Marcus laughed, imagining Emma patiently instructing a classroom full of children in the art of flower arrangement while simultaneously diagnosing their emotional needs and teaching them basic wilderness survival skills. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, Marcus stood in the town square of Cedar Ridge watching Emma demonstrate proper technique for identifying edible plants to a group of fascinated children and concerned parents. She wore a simple dress made from fabric they had chosen together, her dark hair braided with fresh wildflowers, explaining the difference between safe and dangerous berries with the confident authority of someone who had learned these lessons through necessity rather than textbooks. Marcus himself wore clean work clothes and boots polished for the occasion, his beard neatly trimmed but still decorated with the small white flowers Emma had woven there that morning. He was scheduled to teach a workshop on emergency preparedness later that afternoon, and tomorrow he would begin consulting with the county on improved rescue protocols for mountain emergencies. They still lived on the mountain, still maintained their quiet rhythms of daily life in their beloved cabin. But now their world extended beyond the tree line, encompassing a community that had learned to see them not as curiosities or oddities but as valuable neighbors with unique gifts to share. "Mr. Marcus," a voice called out, and Marcus turned to see little Sarah Morrison running toward him with the boundless energy of a healthy 4-year-old. "Emma said you're going to teach us how to build birdhouses." "That's right," Marcus confirmed, crouching down to Sarah's level. "Would you like to help?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, then surprised Marcus by throwing her small arms around his neck in an impromptu hug. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered in his ear. Marcus hugged her back, feeling the same rush of purpose and connection that had become familiar over the past months. This was what Emma had seen from the beginning, that isolation was not the same as peace, that helping others was not the same as losing yourself, that love shared multiplied rather than diminished. Emma appeared at his side, having finished her plant identification lesson, and slipped her hand into his. "Ready for the birdhouse workshop?" she asked. Marcus looked at this remarkable child who had wandered into his forest 8 months ago and changed everything about his understanding of what it meant to be alive. Emma, who braided flowers in his beard not to tame his wildness but to show the world that even the fiercest guardians could be gentle, that even the most self-sufficient souls could create beauty and share it freely. "Ready," he said, and together they walked toward the workshop area, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warm approval of a community that had learned to see them not as the strange hermits from the mountain, but as the family who had taught them all something about the true meaning of home. Behind them, the mountain rose into the clear blue sky, still their sanctuary, still their source of strength, but no longer their hiding place. They belonged to the mountain, and the mountain belonged to them, but they also belonged to this community of people who had learned to trust their wisdom and value their gifts. And every morning, Emma still braided flowers into Marcus's beard, transforming the fearsome mountain man into someone who looked exactly like what he had always been underneath. A protector, a teacher, a father, and a friend. The flowers were always different, sometimes wild roses, sometimes mountain laurel, sometimes simple daisies, but their meaning remained constant. They were Emma's daily reminder to the world that love makes all things beautiful, that kindness is the greatest strength, and that the most unlikely families are often the most perfect ones. They called him the mountain man still, but now they knew the whole story. And the whole story was that sometimes the mountain sends exactly the right person to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And sometimes that person is 7 years old with flowers in her pockets and magic in her heart. The morning after the storm dawned with the crystalline clarity that only comes after nature has exhausted itself. Sunlight poured through Marcus's windows, illuminating a cabin that looked like the aftermath of a very successful sleepover party. The Hendersons were sharing the couch, wrapped in Emma's handmade quilt and drinking coffee from Marcus's best mugs. The Morrison children had arranged themselves on sleeping bags near the fire, playing a quiet card game while their parents spoke in low voices with Sheriff Rodriguez about insurance claims and towing services. Emma moved through it all like a graceful conductor orchestrating a complex symphony, checking on everyone's needs, refilling coffee cups, and somehow managing to braid fresh flowers into Marcus's beard while balancing a toddler on her hip. Where did she get flowers in the middle of winter? Tom Bradley asked, staring at the delicate white blooms woven through Marcus's dark hair. She dries them in summer, Marcus explained, unconsciously touching one of the flowers. Keeps them in special boxes she made herself. Says everyone needs beauty, even in the hardest seasons. Tom shook his head in amazement. That kid is something else. I've been a paramedic for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone handle crisis situations the way she does. It's like she knows exactly what each person needs to feel safe again. Marcus watched Emma demonstrate origami to Jake Morrison, folding scraps of paper into birds and flowers with the same focused attention she brought to everything else. She sees connections that most people miss. Between people, between needs, between what is and what could be. As the day progressed and road crews finally cleared enough snow for vehicles to move safely, their guests began the process of returning to their normal lives. But before they left, something remarkable happened. Walter Henderson, who had been quiet most of the morning, stood up with the careful dignity of his 83 years and cleared his throat for attention. I need to say something, he announced. To the room. Dorothy and I have been living on this mountain for 47 years. We've seen good neighbors and bad neighbors, and we've learned to tell the difference. He looked directly at Marcus. What you and Emma did last night risking your own safety to save strangers in a storm, that's not something you forget. That's not something you can repay. Dorothy Henderson nodded emphatically. We want everyone in town to know who you really are. Not the stories and rumors, but the truth. You're not just the mountain man anymore. You're Marcus Thorne, and you're a hero. Marcus felt his face flush with uncomfortable attention. I'm not a hero. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly what makes you a hero, Jim Morrison said, speaking up from where he sat with little Sarah on his lap. Her fever had broken during the night, and she was once again the bright-eyed 4-year-old her parents knew and loved. Heroes don't think about whether they're being heroic. They just see people who need help and they help. Emma looked up from her origami demonstration with a smile that lit up the entire room. "See, I told you the mountain brought us people who needed help, and helping them helped us too." Sheriff Rodriguez, who had been documenting the night's events for her official report, closed her notebook and looked at Marcus with professional respect. "The county is going to want to offer you a position. Emergency rescue consultant, something like that. Your knowledge of these mountains, combined with Emma's unique abilities, could save a lot of lives." Marcus felt a moment of panic at the thought of official employment, regular schedules, bureaucratic oversight. But then he looked at Emma, who was watching him with patient confidence, and realized that accepting help from the outside world didn't mean giving up their independence. "What would that involve?" he asked carefully. "Mainly what you did last night," Sheriff Rodriguez explained. "Being available when weather or terrain makes normal rescue operations impossible. Training other rescue personnel in mountain survival. Maybe consulting on emergency preparedness for remote residents." Emma nodded encouragingly. "We could help people learn to be safer up here, and we could still live the way we want to live." As their guests prepared to leave, each family took time to thank Emma specifically for her care and kindness. The Morrison children made her promise to visit them in town soon. Dorothy Henderson pressed a jar of homemade jam into her hands, saying it was payment for all the stories Emma had told during the long night. Tom Bradley left his business card and asked if she would consider letting him teach her formal first aid techniques. "You have instincts that can't be taught," he told her. "But if you learned proper medical procedures to go with those instincts, you could save even more lives." Emma accepted all these offers with the gracious maturity that never failed to amaze Marcus. She understood, perhaps better than anyone else, that their time of complete isolation was ending. But that didn't mean their special life together had to change in any fundamental way. After everyone had gone and the cabin was restored to its normal quiet order, Marcus and Emma sat on their porch in the warm afternoon sun, watching the snow melt from the trees in tiny diamond showers. "Do you regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "Having all those people in our space, being discovered?" Marcus considered the question seriously. 24 hours ago, the idea of strangers in his cabin would have filled him with anxiety. The noise, the chaos, the invasion of his carefully protected privacy, it should have been overwhelming. Instead, it had felt like coming alive. "No," he said finally, "I don't regret it. It felt right, like we were doing what we were supposed to be doing." Emma nodded with satisfaction. "I knew you'd feel that way. You're happiest when you're fixing things or building things or helping things grow. People are just another kind of thing that sometimes needs fixing." The simplicity of this observation made Marcus laugh. "Is that your philosophy of life? People are things that sometimes need fixing?" "Part of it," Emma said seriously. "The other part is that fixing things for other people fixes something in yourself too. Like how helping Luna made me feel better about not being able to save my parents. Or how taking care of all those people last night made you remember that you like taking care of people." Marcus stared at his 7-year-old daughter, once again marveling at the depth of wisdom contained in such a small person. "When did you get so smart about feelings?" Emma shrugged. "Feelings aren't that complicated if you pay attention to them instead of trying to hide from them. You taught me that, even though you didn't know you were teaching it." Over the following weeks, word of their rescue mission spread through the town of Cedar Ridge with the efficiency of small-town gossip networks. But instead of the wild stories and exaggerated rumors that had characterized talk about the mountain man for years, the news stories were grounded in truth and filled with gratitude. Henrik from the hardware store drove up to their cabin personally, bringing supplies and an offer to establish regular trading arrangements. "The whole town's talking about what you did," he told Marcus, while Buster the dog immediately gravitated toward Emma as if recognizing a kindred spirit. "People want to help you however they can. Dr. Patricia Chun, the town's only physician, made the trek to their cabin to check on Emma's health and offer medical training. Tom Bradley told me about your intuitive diagnostic abilities, she told Emma over hot chocolate and cookies. With proper training, you could be an incredible asset to our medical team. Most surprisingly, the elementary school principal, Ms. Angela Foster, arrived with a proposition that took both Marcus and Emma completely off guard. We've heard about Emma's intelligence and maturity, Ms. Foster explained, sitting in their kitchen and accepting Marcus's offer of coffee. Several of our families have children who struggle with traditional classroom learning. We'd like to offer Emma the opportunity to participate in our education program, while also allowing her to help other children who might benefit from her unique perspective. Emma listened to this proposal with the careful attention she gave to all important decisions. Would I have to come every day and sit in rows and take tests about things that don't matter? Miss Foster smiled at Emma's directness. We could arrange something flexible. Maybe 2 or 3 days a week with projects that interest you and opportunities to work with children who need extra help with confidence or social skills. Marcus watched Emma's face as she considered this offer. He could see her weighing the benefits of formal education against the freedom of their mountain life, the chance to help other children against the risk of being pressured to conform to expectations that didn't fit her nature. Could Marcus come sometimes? Emma asked finally. To teach things about building and surviving and taking care of animals? I think the school board would be very interested in that possibility, Ms. Foster said diplomatically. That evening, as they discussed the various offers and opportunities that had emerged from their one night of rescue work, Emma made an observation that crystallized everything Marcus had been feeling. People down in town aren't so different from animals up here, she said, working on a new story quilt square that depicted their cabin surrounded by grateful visitors. They just want to feel safe and cared for and like they belong somewhere. And when you help them feel those things, they want to help you feel them too. Marcus realized she was describing community, the thing he had run from 15 years ago, convinced it was a source of pain and disappointment. But Emma, with her gift for seeing connections and patterns, had recognized that community could also be a source of strength and purpose. So what do you think we should do? Marcus asked. About the job offers, the school, all of it? Emma set down her sewing and looked at him with those wise green eyes. I think we should do what feels right and not worry too much about what other people expect. The mountain will still be here. Our cabin will still be home. But maybe home can be bigger than just this one place. She paused, then added with a smile. Besides, someone has to teach the people in town how to braid flowers properly. I've seen their attempts, and they're terrible. Marcus laughed, imagining Emma patiently instructing a classroom full of children in the art of flower arrangement while simultaneously diagnosing their emotional needs and teaching them basic wilderness survival skills. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, Marcus stood in the town square of Cedar Ridge watching Emma demonstrate proper technique for identifying edible plants to a group of fascinated children and concerned parents. She wore a simple dress made from fabric they had chosen together, her dark hair braided with fresh wildflowers, explaining the difference between safe and dangerous berries with the confident authority of someone who had learned these lessons through necessity rather than textbooks. Marcus himself wore clean work clothes and boots polished for the occasion, his beard neatly trimmed but still decorated with the small white flowers Emma had woven there that morning. He was scheduled to teach a workshop on emergency preparedness later that afternoon, and tomorrow he would begin consulting with the county on improved rescue protocols for mountain emergencies. They still lived on the mountain, still maintained their quiet rhythms of daily life in their beloved cabin. But now their world extended beyond the tree line, encompassing a community that had learned to see them not as curiosities or oddities but as valuable neighbors with unique gifts to share. Mr. Marcus, a voice called out, and Marcus turned to see little Sarah Morrison running toward him with the boundless energy of a healthy 4-year-old. "Emma said you're going to teach us how to build birdhouses." "That's right," Marcus confirmed, crouching down to Sarah's level. "Would you like to help?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, then surprised Marcus by throwing her small arms around his neck in an impromptu hug. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered in his ear. Marcus hugged her back, feeling the same rush of purpose and connection that had become familiar over the past months. This was what Emma had seen from the beginning, that isolation was not the same as peace, that helping others was not the same as losing yourself, that love shared multiplied rather than diminished. Emma appeared at his side, having finished her plant identification lesson, and slipped her hand into his. "Ready for the birdhouse workshop?" she asked. Marcus looked at this remarkable child who had wandered into his forest 8 months ago and changed everything about his understanding of what it meant to be alive. Emma, who braided flowers in his beard not to tame his wildness but to show the world that even the fiercest guardians could be gentle, that even the most self-sufficient souls could create beauty and share it freely. "Ready," he said, and together they walked toward the workshop area, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warm approval of a community that had learned to see them not as the strange hermits from the mountain, but as the family who had taught them all something about the true meaning of home. Behind them, the mountain rose into the clear blue sky, still their sanctuary, still their source of strength, but no longer their hiding place. They belonged to the mountain, and the mountain belonged to them, but they also belonged to this community of people who had learned to trust their wisdom and value their gifts. And every morning, Emma still braided flowers into Marcus's beard, transforming the fearsome mountain man into someone who looked exactly like what he had always been underneath: a protector, a teacher, a father, and a friend. The flowers were always different, sometimes wild roses, sometimes mountain laurel, sometimes simple daisies, but their meaning remained constant. They were Emma's daily reminder to the world that love makes all things beautiful, that kindness is the greatest strength, and that the most unlikely families are often the most perfect ones. They called him the mountain man still, but now they knew the whole story. And the whole story was that sometimes the mountain sends exactly the right person to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And sometimes that person is 7 years old with flowers in her pockets and magic in her heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.